What is going on, everyone? Happy week one of the 2021 college football season. I'm Lauren Sisler with AL.com, joined by Mike Rodak, also with AL.com, and we are bringing you SEC Insider week one because it is go time. What is up, my man? Are you so excited about football season right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit sooner than it was last year. Remember last year we had to wait to the last week of September? So this actually feels like it's still summertime outside. It's hot, it's sticky, and football's back. So a little bit different than last year.
Yeah, you cannot complain about that. Obviously, getting right into things and to what could be much more of a normal season than we saw a season ago. And we get things started at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta for the Chick-fil-A kickoff, Alabama, Miami, 2:30 p.m. Central Time on ABC. And I'll just ask you first and foremost, kind of off the top right there, just your expectations just for the environment, the atmosphere. I'm told that the expectation is they will be sold out at capacity. Sort of what are your thoughts kind of going into it as it pertains to the traditions and pageantry of college football that I know everyone is anxious to get back to?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is kind of the first time since 2019, since really the Citrus Bowl against Michigan, which is another obviously big time program, proud program, a program where people travel to that game. I would expect the same out of Miami fans. And yeah, it's going to be, I'd expect to be a fairly full stadium in Atlanta. And, the crowd noise certainly, I think, will be more of a factor than it was at any point last year. And we'll have to see how that affects which team more. I would expect there to be more Alabama fans, just given the proximity to the state and their fan base a little bit more than Miami. But I would expect there to still be some, loud Miami fans, and how much that affects Bryce Young and the offense, we'll have to see. I think it's probably more the noise aspect will probably more affect the Miami offense. I did ask though Jordan Battle, the Alabama safety, about just kind of going back to having crowd noise on defense, because they're so used to, going back 2 years ago for him, you have the LSU game and the Auburn game, and when the offense is on the field, the defense for Alabama's on the field, and that's when the crowd is usually the loudest during home games. And how do you communicate when it's that loud? And then you go to last year where it's probably easier to communicate. But Battle said it's really not, there's not a difference because it's all hand signals and they're just communicating non-verbally, shall we say. And so crowd noise, I guess, won't really impact what they're doing defensively for Alabama.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie. I've been in those practices when they pump the crowd noise in to the practice facility at Alabama, and it is like screeching to the point. I mean, you can't have a conversation. I had to step outside to have a conversation, like out back, and had to like walk like 10 feet away from the building to be able to do it. I'm thinking, like, how are these guys not deaf? It is so loud. But I know that the players are definitely anxious to kind of get back to that, obviously, to get back to sort of that normalcy and feeling like a real college football season. And what better way to do it against a Miami team? So we'll get into kind of the three talking points here. First and foremost for you, greatest strength of this Alabama team coming into this 2021 season is?
So I said, we had this article on AL.com over the weekend about it, was the pass defense, which was probably, you asked people last year, that was probably one of their weaknesses. Again, it's all relative for Alabama. For that to be a weakness is still probably a strength for most teams if you put the same players on a different team. But for Alabama, I think the pass defense could be pretty strong this year. When you look at the pass rush up front, Will Anderson and Christopher Allen might be two of the best, combination of pass rushers in the SEC, maybe in the country. Anderson, especially being a first-team All-American. And then in the back end, they're much more experienced than they were going into last year when they had to replace 4 out of 5 starters. Now they have 4 out of 5 starters back, or 5 out of 6 if you include, potentially having 6 defensive backs on the field. So really, they just have to replace Patrick Surtain, and I think Josh Jobe seems to have filled in that spot pretty nicely. The question mark would be the number 2 corner spot. But you have 2 safeties and DeMarco Hellams, assuming he's back and healthy from his ankle, and then Jordan Battle, who are pretty experienced. They know what they're doing back there. There's been pretty strong reviews from Nick Saban. And then your sub-package guys who were both freshmen last year, Malachi Moore and Brian Branch, are now a year older, and 2 pretty talented players there. So if everything kind of works in conjunction between the pass rush and the secondary, and then plus the linebackers too, you have a pretty good cover linebacker in Christian Harris, and Henry To'oTo'o can probably do some of that as well. That's that's a good defense right there to kind of shut teams down. And they weren't bad against the pass last year either. I mean, they were kind of up there in the stats as far as where they rank in the country. So if they can improve on that, then they're certainly capable of shutting down a lot of teams.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the overall defense and sort of the criticism they've received in recent years, not the defense that we've grown accustomed to seeing under Nick Saban, I certainly think that that will be an area where they can produce a lot of high praise. And kind of to get back to that, and I know Pete Golding has talked about that, and specifically in some of the meetings, with the media, and obviously, when we did his spring game, when we did Alabama spring game, and just how, the defense is not going to be nearly as dominant as it used to be, especially with the way teams are running their offenses now. But that was always a staple for them, and he caught a lot of criticism. And keep in mind, back in 2019, this was a very banged up defense. And then in 2020, they were obviously able to bring some of that back, get those guys healthy. And then to your point, they are going to be stacked on that side of the football. And I think that there'll be a lot of strength there, to go along with it, which then gets us to the biggest question mark entering week one of the season, which I know a lot of people, I think, obviously coming off of a stretch of seasons here where the offense has just dominated, torched their opponents, obviously with Tua Tagovailoa being at quarterback, all the weapons he had around him, and then obviously Mac Jones taking over at the helm under center. So with that being said, there's a lot of talent on that side of the football. Obviously, Bryce Young being the one guy that, everyone is anxious to see what he can do when he's out there live performing against an opponent other than Alabama itself. Just your thoughts on the biggest question mark entering week one of the season.
Yeah, I think to some extent Bryce is a question mark just because we haven't seen him start a game yet. And I don't think we can declare him to be, everything he's made into being until we actually see him on the field. But everything that we've heard from the spring and now in fall camp is very positive about Bryce. And they certainly seem to be really happy with where he's at and getting ready to actually see the field here. So I think the bigger question mark for me would be the blocking ahead of him, having lost 3 starters along the offensive line. And even though Leatherwood was the highest pick, I honestly think Landon Dickerson might be the bigger loss. Just obviously off the field, he was such a leader last year and sort of that charismatic guy who everybody gravitated towards, but did a really good job at center too on the field when he was healthy before his injury. So that's been the one spot where, as of late, it seems like they're still trying to figure that out. We thought it was going to be Chris Owens, but now it really seems like maybe the pendulum swung over to Darian Dalcourt. If you look at some of the pictures from practice, which again were closed to us, but it seems like Dalcourt was in there with the first team last week, and maybe we'll take over for Chris Owens in that center spot. But that was one of the positions that Saban brought up. Right tackle was the other, with Kendall Randolph being out with a sprained ankle, and whether it's going to be him or J.C. Latham, the freshman. But the offensive line still has some things to figure out. And then the other aspect of blocking too is the tight end position. And certainly it hasn't been a very positive review so far from Nick Saban of Julio Billingsley. And then even when we asked about Cameron Latu, who seemed to be the guy who was elevating up the depth chart in the spring, Saban didn't really give too much of a glowing review of him either last week. So that seems to be another position where they're still trying to figure things out here.
Yeah, I think that the key word here for the offense especially would be development, how they develop throughout fall camp. Obviously not getting fall camp last year, or I should say spring football last year, certainly benefits them to be able to, have a lot more time with each other and building some of that chemistry and that development, because we know this is that developmental period, spring into fall camp, that Nick Saban always reiterates. So I think development will be key, especially on the offensive side of the football as the season goes on. And lastly, where does Miami pose the greatest threat? Obviously, looking at the greatest strength of this team and potentially the biggest question marks and weaknesses they may have, where do you think Miami poses the greatest threat and presents the biggest challenge for this Alabama team in week one?
Yeah, you're talking about a top 15, top 16 team, depending on which poll you're looking at. But it's funny, they only got one player on the All-ACC preseason team, and that was their safety, Bubba Bolden. But with that being said, they had the number 2 vote getter in terms of ACC preseason player of the year, and De'Ara King, who's just second to Sam Howell at the same position for North Carolina, which is why he wasn't on the All-ACC team. So really, I think the biggest threat is probably De'Ara King. an experienced quarterback who's certainly, proven himself pretty well to this point in his career. Can certainly do a lot of things with his legs. He had over 500 rushing yards last year. And, their experience at wide receiver as well. Hardy being, I think, their leading returning receiver from last year. And then just overall, what that offense might bring under Rhett Lashley, who, Alabama fans know him a little bit going back to Auburn. He was there 2013 through 2016, had, of course, that, the 2013 kick six win against Alabama. But, after that, those next 3 Iron Bowls weren't the greatest for Auburn's offense. So, how much of that carries over to now, I don't know. I think the bigger question there would just be, does he have something up his sleeve? He comes from that Gus Malzahn tree where you just never quite know what to expect. And you have an entire off season of sitting at his desk and planning what to do against Nick Saban's defense. And just what does he do different that might catch Alabama off guard? I think that would be another concern if I was Nick Saban trying to prepare for Miami.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the case always when you come into these week 1 games, just the getting everybody kind of on the same page. The communication is always key, kind of, again, that development now being put into action, obviously in a live game in a live environment. One that we know is always fun. Atlanta is always a great place for these guys to play and open up the season. So I know in many ways they will feel like home, and certainly the opportunity again to play in front of, a packed house is going to be a lot of fun for those guys. So certainly looking forward to it. Mike, do you know what the opening line on this game is and how much Alabama's favored?
I think the last time I checked it was 14. I would have to, that was a couple weeks ago, though. I would have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it was about 2 touchdowns.
All right. Got it. Sounds good. Well, we appreciate you. Appreciate the insight. Alabama, Miami season opener, Chick-fil-A kickoff, 2:30 p.m. Central Time on ABC. That will be going down in Atlanta at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Of course, Mike, you will be there, I assume, right? Will you be making the trip? I guess we'll be sending the crew down to cover it. So you can, of course, follow his updates on Twitter, as well as on AL.com and all of our social media channels. And again, we appreciate your insight, and we'll check back in with you on game day.
Sounds good.